Hello, hello. Waiting for people to join. For those of you who watch this recording, don't mind the beginning. It's always a little slow going as we get people in, especially when I'm 5 minutes late. As always, as is my life. So as we wait for some people to come in, I guess I'll just kind of describe what we're going to do today. So we have our 14th group in the HVA-Chicks Coalition. In the history of the HVA-Chicks Coalition, our 14th group of people is going to be testing out of the EPA 608 course. That's going to happen next week. So what I've decided to do, we only do generally like a bunch of individuals will test out throughout the year at any given point in time. But when we have groups like this of a whole bunch of people that started at the same time that are kind of ending near the same time and are all choosing to test out kind of at the same time, what I like to do is do refresher courses. So we only do this a couple of times a year, so it doesn't make it super redundant. That's my reasoning for it. So basically what we're going to do today is we're going to go over the core. So it doesn't matter which type of 608 that you're getting, whether it's type 1, type 2, or type 3, whichever one you're getting, you have to pass 25 questions of the core. So if you have a type 1 certificate, if you're going to test out for your type 1 certificate, that means that you're going to take 25 questions of the core, which is the chemistry of it all. And then you're going to take 25 questions for type 1. Same with type 2, same with type 3. It's the only exception. So any one of the types is going to have 50 questions on it. The only exception is if you take 2 or more. So if you take type 1 and 2 at the same time, then you're going to have 25 for each. So you'll have 75 questions. What most people will do instead is take the universal. So that's type 1, type 2, and type 3. That qualifies you to work on anything that holds refrigerant. And when we do that, we're going to have 100 questions. You'll have 25 for each type and then the 25 for the core. So the core never changes. The core is the same test questions, give or take, as everybody. So it doesn't matter what you're going for. If it's an EPA, you're going to take the core. So what we're going to talk about today is that core. We're going to go over the chemistry of it all. We're going to go over the laws, dates that are important that we have to remember, things like this that are essential to passing. So nobody can pass their type without passing the core. Super, super important stuff here. So we're going to go over that. There's a lot of writing on the board. I am going to teach on the board, but I don't expect you guys to remember every single thing you see here. All of my students who are taking this have already gone through their skill cat, have already done the whole EPA course, and this is just a refresher. So we're going to refresh all of the stuff that I know for a fact is on the test. And then we're also going to go a little bit further than that and go over some things that should be on the test, including A2Ls. So we won't see A2Ls on the EPA course for a very long time. And that's unfortunate. It's really hard for us as technicians, as owners, as any part of HVAC to try to work on something when we've not been taught or licensed in it yet. And yes, there are great certification courses out there. ESCO has one. There are a bunch of places that have them. We have our own, but it's not a certified accreditation yet. It just teaches you all the basics that you need to know about A2Ls. If you haven't taken that yet, please go and do that. It is on this YouTube channel. But we're going to go over a little bit of that today too, just because anybody getting their EPA is probably going to be moving into working on A2Ls. So a lot of this stuff that we're going to learn about is stuff that is phasing out or has already phased out. So that's kind of the important thing to remember is that yes, it's on the test. A2Ls are not, but what we're working on is A2Ls and HFCs, which we'll get into. So there's a couple people here. It's kind of fluctuating. Hi, Matt. HVAC doctor says hello. You guys, I am going to turn around my camera so that the board isn't backwards to you, because even when you mirror flip it, I found out the hard way that it is still backwards for everybody else. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it around. I won't be able to see your comments, but Matt, if you are going to stick around, if you could just kind of address some of those questions, if we get any, that would be great. A lot of my students are going to be watching this on recording because it is a busy Saturday of the summer, right? Either they're on call or they are running around with kids for sports, things like that. It's also just before 4th of July weekend. So we're getting this out there just so that it will be on the YouTube page and people can watch it anytime they want. So if you are here watching the recording, thank you for doing your due diligence, even though you couldn't make it during the live, totally fine with us. I'm going to go ahead and flip this around, and then I'm going to start teaching. So if you guys have questions, go ahead and put them in the comments. If Maddie's not here or doesn't answer them, I will get to them afterward. I just want you to know I'm not ignoring you. I just have to flip my camera around. I won't be able to check it out. So let's get started. We'll get my chair out of the way here. And then I'm going to flip you and flip you. And just line it up so that you guys can all see. All right. And my light just shut off. Okay, that's all right. We'll use this one. Don't mind the glares in the middle, you guys. I will get to all of it. Again, you're not expected to like know what's going on here other than what I'm about to teach you. So listening and paying attention is the most important thing. Again, this is going to be recorded, so you can go back and look at this anytime you want. If you are about to test out, if you're one of my students about to test out, or you're about to test out on your own individually, this is a great resource because the core is, again, the most important part. So some of you weren't here when I went over the types, so we're going to do that again. But first, I just want to start with what the hell are we doing here? So the core is the most important part of the EPA because it's on every EPA. So I did just go over this a few minutes ago. For those on the recording, I'm very sorry, but there are live people here, so we're going to go over it again. So there are 3 types of EPA 608. There's also an EPA 609, which is for vehicles, and we'll get into that on a different note. But for today, we're going to go over the 3 types of EPA for air conditioning and refrigeration. So those types are Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3. Now, we just went over the fact that no matter which one you're doing, no matter which test you're taking, you can take 1, you can take 2, or you can take all 3, which is the universal. And it does not matter which one you're doing. You are going to have 25 questions on the core. And the core is the chemistry, the laws, it's our EPA guidelines, where they came from and where they're going. So that's how I want you to think about the core. The core is not actually about working on equipment, even though it does set guidelines for working on equipment. But this is about the chemistry of it all. This is day 1, basic HVAC. And unfortunately, there are a lot of 50-year techs out there that, and we'll get into why, that didn't even get to take this, or they had to take it way later in their lives. So we're trying to avoid that now. Now we want you all to take this now so that it doesn't become a problem later in your life. But let's get right into it. Type 1 is going to be 5 pounds or less. So your self-contains, all of your like home chest freezers, refrigerators, things like that are smaller, window units, window shaker units, those are all going to be covered under the Type 1. But again, if you were to take just the Type 1, you're going to have 25 core questions and 25 Type 1 questions about the equipment itself. Type 2, pretty self-explanatory. That's what almost all of us here do, okay? So Type 2 is going to be 5 to 50 pounds. That is air conditioners. That is refrigeration units in, commercial kitchens. That's going to be all of these things. And again, if you have Type 1, or if you have Type 2, then you have your Type 1 and Type 2. So you're able to work on these smaller units and the little bit bigger units as well. So if you're in a commercial kitchen, it definitely pays to have your Type 2. You can work on the air conditioning there. You can work on the units that do hold more than 5 pounds, ice machines, all those things. But you can also work on those small self-contained units as well. Type 2 is going to be the one, again, that all of us need. Type 3 is a little bit different. Type 3 is going to be our heavy commercial and industrial units. So that's going to be 50 pounds or more. It's actually 51 pounds or more, I believe. But we're going to be working on chillers in this type. We're going to be working on, it's mostly chillers. It's stuff for labs. It's stuff for, the bigger stuff that you would never see in a home, if that makes sense. And this is actually where most people fail the EPA universal test. And that is for the sole purpose that they are focusing on the other 2. Right? These are the ones we're going to see all the time. So I'm going to put all of my retention and all of my brain power into types 1 and 2 because I know I'm going to be working on those. But if you dig a little bit deeper and you can keep that retention on your type 3, this universal license will open it up so you can work on any unit in the world that holds refrigerant. So very, very important if you are wanting to advance in your career. So say your job that you're going for is an appliance repair job and you're only going to need your type 1. Okay, but in 5 years, you don't want to have to go back, do that core again, and take your type 2 or your type 3. So I always recommend the universal, no matter what you are coming into HVAC for. I always recommend universal. If you're crunched for time, type 2 is the one that I go for. Always do type 2 because then you're going to have your type 1, your type 2, and your 25 core questions as well. So that's going to be 75 questions on your test. If you take the universal, it will be 100. If you take only type 1, you'll have 50 questions. So when we get into type 2 and type 3, we have a little bit of a change there. This is another difference. If you're only type 1, you're not required to keep records of the refrigerant you use, which I think is personally crazy, but record keeping is required in type 2 and type 3. So you want to really make sure that you know that if you are in a situation where maybe you're going to open up an appliance repair business and you do not want to work on any type 2 stuff, then maybe getting your type 1 is right for you because A, only 50 questions, and B, you don't need to keep those records. There will still be other records that you do have to keep. You just don't have to track your refrigerant, and we'll talk about that. All right, so that covers the types. If anybody has questions about the types, put them in the comments. We can go over that. We're going to come back a little bit, and we're going to start at the very beginning. So the very beginning of the EPA 608 core is, what are refrigerants? And there are lots of answers to that question. There are enough answers to that question for me to go for the next century and not take a breath. That's how much there is that goes into how many refrigerants are there. But for the ones that we're going to talk about today are the ones that are going to be covered on your core. So first we're going to start with some dates because this is going to segue into that. So before 1987, we did not have regulation on refrigerants. And so there were many refrigerants available prior to 1987. But here in the US, we didn't have a license to handle those refrigerants. We didn't have any clear guidelines as to how to handle them. We could vent them to the atmosphere and have no repercussions whatsoever. It was completely fine. We learned that we were a very big part of the responsibility of the hole blown in our ozone layer. So what did that mean? That meant we had to start enacting some laws. We had to start regulating this. So why? Why are they damaging to our atmosphere? Why are they damaging to our ozone layer? And that's what we're going to get into here. So our original refrigerants prior to 1987 were mostly of the CFC kind. We did have natural refrigerants. We used ammonia a lot back then, but they weren't widely used the way that CFCs were. So a CFC is a chlorofluorocarbon. Okay, so that means we have chlorine, fluorine, and carbon. Okay. The damaging part of that, and there are a couple of damaging parts of that, but for this purpose, we're going to start with the first one, and that's going to be the chlora. Chlorine is a very dangerous chemical when it comes to our ozone. So what happens is chlorine that's in the refrigerant gets vented to the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is made up of a whole lot of ozone. There's a whole bunch of ozone in our atmosphere, and we need it. It protects us from damaging things in space, right? So we have to keep that ozone layer intact. But what was happening is we found out that one chlorine molecule, just one chlorine molecule, is capable of destroying up to 100,000 ozone molecules. Now, ozone is O3. So it's 3 oxygens stuck together, all right? So when your one chlorine sticks to that ozone, it destroys all of the oxygen in that ozone and then continues to collect ozone to destroy. So if chlorine destroys oxygen, we can surmise that that's probably not very good for our atmosphere, being humans who rely on it to breathe, right? But when ozone is so important to our atmosphere, and we're destroying that at such a rapid rate, one molecule, 100,000 ozone. So now imagine a tank of refrigerant. That's an astronomical number that we can't even calculate here in our heads. Now imagine an industrial unit that uses 500 pounds of R12, and that's vented to the atmosphere. We are talking such a massive scale of destruction that we caused, and we know we caused it. So prior to 1987, there was no regulation on chlorine in the atmosphere. Another thing that used chlorine a lot is these room sprays, aerosols. Not this particular one, but an aerosol room spray was full of CFCs back in the day. So in 1987, 94, I believe 94 or 96, one or the other, countries got together and decided enough's enough. We got to do something about this. The science is there. We have the data. We know that this is a problem now. We can't ignore it anymore, as much as they would have loved to. So they got together and they signed the Montreal Protocol. And the Montreal Protocol is just a treaty between all of these countries saying we will no longer use CFCs, but wait, in aerosol cans. That's where it started. As we kept going with that Montreal Protocol and different amendments were added to it and different, conversations were had about this needs to be better, this needs to be more widespread, they added our CFCs as well in refrigerants. So now CFCs are no more as of 1987. But that didn't mean that we weren't going to see them. That didn't mean we didn't still have a whole bunch of R11 and R12 units out there still running, still leaking. We still had no regulation as far as our trade itself. All we had was a protocol saying we can't use CFCs. Later on, we added HCFCs to those as well, meaning it encompassed all chlorine containing refrigerants. And so that leads us in to HCFCs. An HCFC is a hydrochlorofluorocarbon. So it's still a chlorofluorocarbon, just has hydrogen in it too. We thought that was better. It's not that much better. The ODP, the ozone depletion potential, was a little bit lower, but we realized that that was absolutely the wrong road to take. Very shortly after we took it, and it took a very, very long time, and we'll talk about that, to even deal with it at all, even though we knew. So CFCs and HFCs are covered by the Montreal Protocol now. The date to remember for your test is going to be 1987. The next date to remember. What did we do after that? So now we've got CFCs and HFCs being phased out. Okay. In 1990, the Clean Air Act was amended. So we had a Clean Air Act, which did away with CFCs in our aerosol cans, but it didn't deal with refrigeration at all. So, I mean, the difference between an aerosol can and a tank of refrigerant, you can imagine how good that did, what good that did our atmosphere. So in 1990, we amended the Clean Air Act and we added the Montreal Protocol to say no more of any kind whatsoever are to be manufactured. Now that's where it stops, is at the manufacturing part of that. But what we also did in 1990 is we started the first EPA regulations and we made it illegal to vent them. So between 87 and 1990, they were still in the units. They were still being vented every single day. Recovery cylinders were not even invented yet. Okay, not for this purpose anyway. So in 1990, EPA regulation made it illegal to vent. And what else was born of that? The EPA 608 license. So if you picture, up until 1990, there was no license in the US for handling refrigerants. That's a pretty small timeline that we have had a license compared to not. So in 1992, illegal to vent came into effect. So this is important because it became illegal to vent in 1990, but it wasn't until 2 years later that it came into effect. You could still blow that stuff everywhere. Why? Because we needed tools. We needed to find a way that we could contain them. And then we needed to get those things on the market. We needed to get technicians listening, caring, because at that point you don't have a way to communicate with the licensed technicians of the country because the license was so brand new, just started. Most people didn't take it for years, decades even. So 1992, recovery is born. November 14th, 1994 is the next one that you have to remember for your test. And that is when the EPA 608 became mandatory. So again, we have a license as of 1992, but it takes until 1994 to make it mandatory. So for those 2 years, everyone's like, screw that license, I don't need that. All of this was still happening up until this date right here, which is so important. November 14th, 1994. Remember it, live by it. EPA 608 became mandatory. That's when our license was officially born. January 1st, 2010 is the next one. That's when we looked at those HCFCs, those hydrochlorofluorocarbons, and said, wait, these are still really, really bad. What are we doing? And an HCFC, a good example of that is R22. But wait, we all know we still see R22 all the time, every day for some people, okay? So if we picture that it was phased, its phase out began, okay, in 2010. So they weren't allowed to make any new R22. But they were still allowed to have it in units. It was still being vented every day. It was still leaking. We had no leak laws at that point. We started some leak laws in 2010, but it didn't become widespread knowledge for a very, very long time after that. So they weren't allowed to make any more new R22, which is what phased out R11 and R12, right? So R22 is better. It's better for the environment. Everybody buy R22. And very shortly after, 20 years after, we decided, just kidding, it's actually really bad still. Because we didn't deal with this chlorine molecule. What are we going to do with this chlorine molecule? We can't seem to get rid of it, but we know it's bad. What do we do? So we started phasing them out. But it wasn't until January 1st, 2024, the AIM Act, okay? It wasn't until the AIM Act. So what did we do? Let's go back, because HCFCs were then quote unquote phased out by HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons. So we've done away with the chlorine and we've got hydrofluorocarbons. That's your 410A, okay? So we've got hydrofluorocarbons now in between these two. But in 2024, we went, wait a minute. We did this again. We got rid of the chlorine. We're not depleting the ozone because 410A has no ozone depletion potential because it doesn't have chlorine in it. Whereas R22 has a massive ozone depletion potential. And R12 and R11 before that were astronomical, okay? So now we've got 410A. Everybody's using it. Everything's going great. We've learned how to deal with the higher pressures. We've gotten all these tools out on the market that make it easier for us to recover and evacuate and read gauge. We have gauges that we can read in so many different ways now. 410 is great. We love 410, right? Nope, just kidding. Because 410 has a whole other potential. And that's the global warming potential. So it's still a greenhouse gas. Even though it doesn't contain chlorine, it's not eating the ozone. It's warming the atmosphere. And 410A is one of the highest at the time. So we have this massive rate of global warming potential now to contend with. The ozone layer starts to seal up. Now we have this massively hot global warming happening because, again, we got it wrong. So it wasn't until 2024, last year, you guys, that we addressed this. How did we address it? Don't ask my opinion. But how did we address it by fact? Sorry, guys, I got something in my eye. We addressed it by phasing down HFCs now. So we started with natural refrigerants, which are ventable. They're completely fine in the atmosphere because they are originating there. They're plentiful. We can get them. They're very, very cheap. And they're great refrigerants. But we decide not to use them. And we make CFCs. Then we make HCFCs. Also really, really bad. Meanwhile, natural refrigerants are over here like, hi, no, okay, all right. So then we go to HFCs. Done away with the chlorine problem, done away with the ozone problem, but now we have a whole nother mess of problems. We're warming the atmosphere. So now, in 2024, the AIM Act was signed. Starts being enforced, well, it was signed years before that, but it begins being enforced January 1st, 2024, with the phase down of HFCs. What is going to replace the HFCs? Oh, natural refrigerants, right? Nope, not natural refrigerants. Instead, we go to HFOs, also known as your A2Ls. That's going to be your, so those are hydrofluoroolefins, okay? Hydrofluoroolefins does away with the excess of carbon, which is what warms our atmosphere. It does away with the chlorine, so that's fine. Now we have hydrogen, fluorine, and olefins. So if we have a new refrigerant that has a very low global warming potential, it has absolutely no ozone depletion potential, okay? We must have hit the jackpot. This must be the best refrigerant ever. No, it's not. So A2L, we're going to go over that. You guys, that will be on the test. What that means will be on the test. So these are A1s. I actually didn't put A1 on the board. So these are going to be your A1s, which is what we've normally been using. And that just means they're non-toxic, non-flammable. That's the ASHRAE rating for non-toxic, non-flammable, okay? And the reason 410 was non-flammable is because it was a mixture of 32B and a flame suppressant. Not another refrigerant, but a flame suppressant. So we took a flammable but very, very good refrigerant in 32B and we added flame suppressant to it. The flame suppressant is what caused the global warming potential. So now, mind you, meanwhile, we're 10 years in everywhere else in the world using 32B. We just now are getting it. We didn't even have access to it. The rest of the world's been using it for years. So now they say, use your A2Ls, A as in non-toxic, 2 as in mildly flammable, and then your Ls, okay? So mildly flammable doesn't mean, it's not like an A3, right? An A3 is going to be a combustible. So that's your isobutane is an A3. Propane is an A3. This is not an A3. This is an A2L. So mildly flammable, we've removed that flame suppressant from our 32B, and now we're running it with the straight zeotrope. So now we're using just 32B, but wait, let's just throw a whole wrench into that mix. So we've got 32B, mildly flammable, but otherwise a great refrigerant. And then we've got 454B. 454B also contains 32B. That's great. We can stop there. No, we can't, because somebody else decided to add 1, 2, 3, 4 YF to it. What's the problem with that? PFAS. That's the problem with that. 1, 2, 3, 4 YF is, my 4s and my Ys look identical. That's so funny. Is a PFAS forever chemical. And so we went from depleting the ozone to warming the atmosphere to now, in 2025, after we know all of this, to deciding to add a PFAS forever chemical into our refrigerant. Not that it matters, because almost every company, save 2, I believe, Samsung and Daikin are the only 2, I believe, that went 32B. There may be more like obscure companies, but as far as the big ones, everybody else went 454B. They all chose that refrigerant that's a PFAS. And when they did that, they created the biggest shortage of refrigerant we've ever seen. So doesn't really matter if you want to go 454B, you can't get it. And if you can get it, you can get a very limited supply. And when you get that very limited supply, it's more expensive than R22, which was phased out in 1992. So my point in this is take stock of what you know and then take stock of what they're telling you. So yes, this is on the test, that this is better than before. The answer is always going to be an HCFC is better than a CFC. It's always going to be that an HFC is better than an HCFC. It's always going to be that an HFO is better than an HFC. Take that with a grain of salt, because though it's the test answer and it's the answer they want from you, it's not the real answer. And around here, we teach real world problems. All right, so if you have any questions about the dates, and if anybody needs me to send these dates, I have some great flashcards for this test. If anybody wants them, please just reach out. They are absolutely yours to have. It is imperative that you pass this part of the test. So if anybody wants these on flashcards, please just reach out to me. All right, so now we've gone over CFC, HFC, HCFC, HFO. We've gone over A1, A2L, and A3. Now we're going to be moving into, oh, actually, we already went through this too. We did ODP and GWP. On the test, it's going to ask you, what is ODP? Ozone depletion potential. What is GWP? Global warming potential. Two very different things. Chlorine causes ODP and carbons cause GWP, right? It's a whole lot of acronyms and it becomes very, very confusing and a tongue twister all the time, but you'll get through it. So ODP, ozone depletion potential. GWP, global warming potential. A2L means low toxicity, mild flammability. A1 means low flammability, low toxicity. A3 means low toxicity, high flammability. And that's pretty much what we work with until you get into ammonia, and then you're going to have high toxicity as well. Natural refrigerants. We've been talking about them. So nitrogen. Nitrogen is a great natural refrigerant. Ammonia is also a natural refrigerant, not as good for humans because it's very toxic. And it also creates byproducts when used with other chemicals. So we want to try to stay away from that. But there are some applications where ammonia is the absolute best because it can be used in an absorption system. So we'll talk about that on another class. But yeah, your natural refrigerants are going to be isobutane, propane, nitrogen, and ammonia for the most part. Those are the big ones. There are others, but. And then venting, we've talked about. So in 1992, it became illegal to vent refrigerant. When we talk about venting, that's one of our vocab words. We talk about venting. What I mean is intentionally loosing refrigerant into the atmosphere. CO2 is another natural refrigerant. It's one that you can vent to the atmosphere. I forgot to add that, and it's like the most important one. So remember CO2. But if we're venting refrigerant, that doesn't mean that we're hooking up our gauges and a little bit squirts out. We're using low loss fittings. We're not venting that. That's called de minimis, which we have down here. That's called de minimis, which is the little tiny bit that you cannot avoid but to loose to the atmosphere. It's not okay, but it's okay because it has to be okay. We don't have a choice. We don't have anything better, right? So venting is going to be, I walk up to a unit, I realize it's overcharged. I open my valve and I just let it go. And then I close my valve up again. Oh, look, my refrigerant charge is beautiful now. That's illegal. You have to hook up a recovery tank. You have to hook up a recovery machine. You have to pull that refrigerant out of the unit safely without it flying into the atmosphere. Anything else is venting, and it is punishable by a $10,000 fine. On the test, it's going to ask you, if I were to report somebody for venting refrigerant, what would happen to that person? That person would get, actually, I think it's a $15,000 fine, supposedly, and I would get $10,000 for reporting them. Yay, hooray, except it's never happened in the history of forever. So the EPA says that it's a thing, but it's actually a myth because nobody's ever gotten their 10 grand. However, it is illegal. So now we're moving into laws, not just fines. It is illegal to vent refrigerant. We never do it. You guys, there's no excuse. Absolutely no excuse for venting refrigerant. If you're in a situation where you need to pull refrigerant out of a machine and you don't have a recovery cylinder, you're going to get a recovery cylinder. Period. I don't care if it's an ounce. I don't care if it's 10 ounces. I don't care if it's 50 pounds. You're removing it into a recovery cylinder. Period. So what about, there was a great example of venting, probably one of the worst examples I've ever seen. So a mall goes into defect. So they're getting rid of the mall. They're demolishing it. Instead of having refrigerant companies come and recover that refrigerant and take it to reclaim, instead, what they did was take bulldozers up there and just grab these units right off the roof and throw them into a big pile. That vented hundreds of pounds of refrigerant. It's illegal. It was not, nobody regulated it. So still to this day, they have not had any repercussions of it. But so that's somebody who doesn't have an EPA license that did that. So they can't be held accountable. But you, as someone with an EPA license, if you get caught doing that, you're in big trouble and you lose your license. And your license is a lifetime license. So to lose it is pretty shitty. Don't do that. Don't ever vent refrigerant, not for any reason. Okay, and next we're going to get into the refrigerant cycle. Those of you who have been taking my classes, you know what the refrigerant cycle is. It is the 4 main components plus a thermostat, right? The 5th main component. But it's going to ask you the 4 main components. 4 main components of an air conditioner are your compressor, your metering device, your condenser coil, and your evaporator coil. Those are your four main components. However, you can't turn the thing on without some sort of thermostat. So that's your fifth main component. Remember that refrigeration cycle refers to the cycle of refrigerant between indoor and outdoor unit via the evaporator and condenser coils, the compressor, and the metering device. Which we've just gone over the next two, so that's great. Saturation. Saturation is my favorite word. This is going to be on your test. Saturation, okay? If we talk about vapor saturation or superheat, right? Saturation means at what point is our refrigerant changing state? So on one side of the unit, it's going to be changing state from a liquid to a gas, to a vapor. On the other side, it'll be doing the opposite thing, and it'll be changing from a vapor back to a liquid. So it's saturated when it is turning actively into the other phase. Not while it's heating up to get there or cooling down to get there, but when it is already actively changing phase. So when we talk about superheat and subcool, superheat is going to be the difference above that saturation point. So at what temperature are we, we'll go with vapor first. At what temperature are we turning into a gas? Okay? Superheat is how many degrees beyond that are we? Okay? And then the same, equal but opposite on the other side, your subcool is when are we saturated as a liquid and how much beyond that are we? And that's going to be your subcool. So those are going to be really important ones on the test. Make sure that you know that. If you need the flashcards, you guys, just ask me. I have them for you ready to go. High side and low side. They're going to talk about this in the test. They're going to have lots of different names too. You'll have your suction side and your liquid side, your high side or your low side. What that refers to is temperature. Okay, so your low side is going to refer to your suction temperature. Your suction is always going to be lower in this situation, unless we're in heat pump mode and we're in heat. Let's not talk about that right now. Right now, we're talking about low side being suction. High side being liquid. Why? Because the liquid side is the hotter side. So it's just referring to temperature of which side of the system. Okay? And then suction and liquid lines. Your small lines are your liquid lines. In mini split, that's not the case. It's a discharge line. You do not have a true liquid line. But in most conventional splits, you will have small liquid lines, bigger suction lines. Big one should be cold. Small one should be hot. Unless you're in heat pump mode. We're not going to talk about that. Evaporator and condenser, we already went over. Your indoor unit is your evaporator. Its job is to change phase. It's to provide surface area in which to change phase. We are only changing the phase with two of those four components, and that is going to be your compressor, which changes your phase from a cold vapor to a hot vapor. And then your metering device is actually going to be the only one that changes phase. We still say the compressor does, but it actually doesn't. It just changes temperature and pressure. But your metering device is going to completely change phase from a vapor back to a liquid with 20% vapor, but we won't talk about that right now either. So anyway, when it asks you which two components change the phase, okay, very important how it's worded, your metering device and your compressor are going to be considered changing phase. However, what are your coils doing then? Because halfway up our coil, we're either turning into a liquid or a vapor. That's because it's providing surface area. The phase is already happening. The phase change is already happening. If a refrigerant boils at negative 20 degrees naturally, right, then within that coil, ambient temperature is going to boil that refrigerant off if we do nothing to it. That's if we do nothing to it. We're helping it along with our compressor and our metering device, but naturally that refrigerant wants to bubble off. So all we're doing is providing a big old outdoor coil for it to turn back into a liquid naturally, and we're providing a big old indoor coil, just surface area. It's not doing anything. It has no job other than to simply hold the refrigerant. And as it's holding the refrigerant is naturally changing its phase. So though we have phase change in both coils, those are not where it takes place. Those are not what causes it to change. Remember that. That will be on your test. All right. Recovery, evacuation, and venting. I think we'll come back to this because I'm kind of sick of it, and I'm sure you are too. Let's go to heat transfer. So heat transfer and thermodynamics. There are three ways to transfer heat in physics, okay? So on Earth, we will say, before anybody comes at me with that, on Earth, there are three ways to transfer heat. And this is all run by the laws of thermodynamics. The first is convection, the second is conduction, and the third is radiation. This will be on your test. Very, very, very important stuff to always remember anyway. Because what homeowners don't understand most of the time, and I did not understand this is counterintuitive. I did not understand this when I was not in HVAC, is that we are not blowing cold into the room. We're removing heat. And as we remove heat, we allow that same air we remove the heat from to come back into the room. It just happens to be colder because we removed the heat. But we are not generating cold and blowing it into the room. We are taking the same air in the room, we're pulling it in, we're removing the heat, we're blowing that heat outside, out of the condenser coil, and then we are pushing that same air back into the room, conditioned. So it's the same air. We're not blowing cold air in. We're taking the air out, conditioning it, and allowing it back in. So that is counterintuitive. Most people sit in front of an air conditioner, it feels cold. Feels like it's blowing cool on you, right? It's not. There's no such thing as blowing cool. There's only such thing as conditioning. So we remove the heat, we blow that air back into that same room through heat transfer. Okay, so the three types of heat transfer, what are they? Convection, conduction, radiation. I've drawn you a little ugly graphic here, which is super sweet. So picture this being a burner on our stove, okay? That is heating in such a way that is considered radiation. Why? Because it's heating itself and its heat is leaving it naturally because heat naturally goes to cold. So if the burner is 200 degrees and our ambient air temperature inside, our indoor temperature is 75, that's cooler. So the ambient air is much cooler than the burner itself. So naturally, that heat is going to go to cold all by itself without having to be blown, or there's no flame here. It's just heating up, right? So if we have a burner that's just heating up with no flame, so I'm not talking about gas, I'm talking about electric only, a burner that's heating up and then dispersing its heat, that's called radiation, okay? If you have a radiator in your home, because you have a boiler system, right? That radiator is just surface area getting hot, and again, allowing its heat to migrate naturally to the cold in the room, okay? That is radiation. The sun is radiation. The sun is hot. Its rays naturally move toward us because we're cold. That's it, radiation. So when we get into conduction, so now I put the pot on my burner. What happens to the pot? It doesn't stay cold, right? Because the pot is colder than the burner, that heat is going to naturally radiate into my pot. Now my pot is hot. And my pot being hot is considered conduction. So if I were to take my hand and put it on that pot, and that pot were to burn me, that is an example of conduction. Now, within the pot, what's happening within the pot? So when we think of heating, we don't think on a molecular level. It's just not where we're at with that. Ooh, it's warm. End of story, right? Unless you're an HVAC tech. It's not the end of the story. Because what happens when we heat, we're going to use water as our refrigerant in this situation, only because refrigerants have so many different bubble and dew points that we would be here forever. So we're going to use water, which boils at 212 degrees and freezes at 32, right? So as I'm heating this pot and there's water in the pot, now that same heat is migrating to the colder water, right? So that heat from the pot is now migrating to the colder water. It's becoming it. As that happens, all of those water molecules, when they're cold, are moving together in a fluid-like state. They're very close together. They're very slow and lazy. And that's what gives us a fluid, is that molecular dance, okay? As it heats up, those molecules move further and further apart through expansion. So now they're moving apart, and now they're not one substance anymore. They're a whole bunch of little mini substances, right? So now we're not moving fluidly together. Now we're vibrating. We're so hot that we're vibrating. All of those molecules are doing anything they can to get away from the one next to it. They want infinite space, infinite room, and they were moving so fast you can't even comprehend it. So these molecules start heating up, start doing their little dance, start moving really, 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 really fast, and then we get evaporation. All that means is that those same water molecules have moved away from each other, so you can't see them touching anymore. When you see a fluid, you're seeing those molecules touching each other. When you see vapor, it's them no longer touching each other. And that's it. So as we heat that water, convection is happening. That heat is being transferred throughout the fluid evenly. And so all of the fluid is doing its best to move as quickly as possible to get away from each other. And that's why the steam rises from the pot. Those molecules that have saturated have become successful at their process of not wanting to be a liquid. They are saturated as a vapor. And as soon as they're saturated as a vapor, they rise from the pot and they leave, which is their only goal. So that is convection. So when we talk about removing heat, we need a substance like water, a fluid, in order to get convection. In order to achieve convection, we have to have a fluid. So instead of water, which is not, I mean, it's a great refrigerant in some situations, R718, it is a refrigerant, but it's not a great refrigerant for what we're doing because we want the ambient temperature in the room to do as much of the work for us as possible. So we use very, very, very low boiling point refrigerants so that the 70-degree air in our home is doing the work. And then the compressor and the metering device are just doing whatever's left, right? So if I have water, okay, at 32 degrees, it's going to turn into ice, right? It's going to freeze. So once I have ice out of my water, once my water is forming ice, I am saturated as a solid, right? And then on the other side, on the flip side, my water gets heated and wants to turn into a gas, a vapor. Once I have vapor, I'm saturated. My superheat and my subcool are what amount beyond that. Okay? That's the best way that I have ever taught it. People understand water better than they understand refrigerant. But understand that this same process is happening within our evaporator coil, within our condenser. It's just happening with a very, very low bubble point refrigerant and in a way that you can't just sit there and watch it happen. All right, so heat transfer. If you have questions about that, please put them in the comments. You guys can always reach out to me if you want more about this again. Recovery, evacuation, and venting. So we talked a little bit about why we recover, but let's go into evacuation. So all venting is illegal if above de minimis. We talked about what de minimis is. Low loss fittings are required. You have to have low loss fittings on your hoses or your probes because if you get rid of any more than de minimis, you're considered venting, which is illegal. Only natural refrigerants don't need to be recovered. So if you have a CO2 rack and you need to recover it, you don't need a tank for that. You can let it loose. It's not going to harm the atmosphere in any way. Okay? You have to use a recovery cylinder to remove the refrigerant. You can't just remove it and let it go anywhere it wants. Evacuate. What does it mean to evacuate? So we've already removed the refrigerant. Isn't that evacuating? No, it's not considered evacuating because once we remove the refrigerant, we still have so much left in there. We still have so many things left in that unit, okay? So air. We just talked about what happens when we have water vapor, right? And all air contains water vapor. So if air gets into our system, we now have water in our system. Well, our compressor only wants to see vapor ever. It's not a pump, it's a compressor. It only wants to ever see vapor. So if moisture, water, gets into that compressor, if it gets into any part of our system and it condenses, that water vapor will condense down into actual drops of water and it will break stuff. We don't want it in our system. So air is one reason why we evacuate. Another reason is moisture. And the last is other non-condensables. So say you don't braze with nitrogen. Say you set up a unit and you connect the piping and you don't flow nitrogen while you braze. What's going to happen in the piping is oxidation. It's going to get soot. Any type of combustion has a byproduct. Most have many. So brazing with a torch, burning a gas like acetylene or like oxygen acetylene, and then now you're touching that torch to copper, which is its own mineral, and then you've got all of that happening at once with air, oxygen everywhere around it. We get byproducts. The byproduct to that is soot, oxidation. So we don't want to ever not flow nitrogen while we braze, but say somebody did. Say what we're recovering and we're evacuating is an old HCFC or CFC unit. Well, we wouldn't be using them most of the time now. We'd be replacing them. But if we have to, right? So back then, they didn't know about oxidation. They didn't know about non-condensables. They didn't even do evacuation. It wasn't a thing, right? So now we know that we have to get that. The only way to make sure that none of that gets into our system, the only way to make sure that we don't have non-condensables, that we don't have moisture, that we don't have air in our system is to drop that system's pressure below atmospheric. We need to completely put that system in a vacuum if we are going to stop all those things, those possibilities from getting inside our system. So it's a closed system. It is not open to the air anywhere. It's a closed system no matter what point you're at. Sometimes your gauges or your probes or your hoses to your recovery tanks or your vacuum pumps are part of that closed system because we need to be able to mess around in there when we need to. So sometimes those things become part of that bigger closed system, but it's still a closed system no matter what. So evacuating is after we recover, we hook up our vacuum pump, we pull that system down into a vacuum. And then after we've done that, now it's safe to put our refrigerant in. We can't put refrigerant in a unit that hasn't been evacuated or we'll end up with a whole bunch of problems. So this next part is very, very controversial because on the test, it's going to tell you two numbers that you have to remember and you have to get them right, but they're not the real world numbers. So we're going to go over both. The first ones are the ones that are on the test. When we put a vacuum pump to our empty unit and we start pulling a vacuum, the old way, because it was all we could achieve with the tools we had, and I want you to understand that. This is what's on the test because the test hasn't been updated. That's it. It tells us to pull a vacuum to 500 microns within the system, okay? And then after we've stopped that vacuum from pulling, and we're waiting on what's called decay. So how much more do my non-condensables rise when my vacuum pump is not turned on? I'm still hooked up, but if my vacuum pump is not turned on, how much am I rising above that 500 microns? So the test wants you to we pull down to 500 microns and we decay test to 1,000 or less. That's what the test wants from you. It's no longer accurate. It's not enough. We pull deeper vacuums now. We have better tools and we have better understanding and better data. So what you're actually going to do is you're going to pull down to 200 microns or less, and you're going to let that decay rise to 500 microns or less. And that is something that I am fought on by many, many, many old heads in this industry. And every single one eventually understands that it's the new normal. Now we pull down to 200 or less, and we let decay rise to 500 or less. But on your test, those numbers are 500 and 1,000. So, yes, you're right. If you don't put that, if you put 200 and 500, yes, you're correct. But the EPA doesn't care. The EPA wants what's their correct, and their correct is 500 and 1,000. Make sure you know that. So, anybody have any questions about all of this craziness? I know there will be questions. I know you might not want to ask them now. You are more than welcome to ask them later on. But if you have questions, I'm going to stop this board nonsense and sit and have a conversation with you. All right. I am going to look into the comments. Beer can cold, Chris Young. Yes. So before that 1987, and even let's be real after it, even still today, some technicians swear that as long as your suction line is cold, you're cooling great. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes it really is. And with lower pressure refrigerants like R22, it was acceptable even. Like as long it was really true. As long as your suction line was cold, you were going to be blowing cold air in. It's still the case, but now cold is not a measurement. So now we need to know how cold. Is it cold enough? Because I could, on a 90-degree day, I could touch a suction line with my hand, right? And it could feel really cold. But in reality, I'm really hot. So that suction line is actually 62 degrees. It's not cold enough. And my supply air is 65 degrees coming out of the vents, right? Into a 70-degree house. So if I just go by, it feels cold, I'm not going to get an accurate reading. And I'm going to tell these people that they're crazy and their air conditioner is working perfectly, even though that is not the case. So that's why we do it. All right, let me look back at some questions. Yes, CO2 is a big natural refrigerant. I can't believe I left out water and CO2 in the beginning. That's so great. Thanks, Maddie, for that. Chlorophyll, more like borophyll. Yep, exactly. All right, so not a whole lot of questions, which I like, and that's probably because not a whole lot of new guys are here. I love that we have so many advanced technicians that come and watch these things. And I know that it's not because you need the information, you already know it. It's because you want to support the channel and support the cause. So I appreciate that. Students watching this on the recording, this is going to be in the hands of a whole lot of people this week because of our testing next week. It feels like a lot. And in the 608 class, we do cram. We absolutely cram. And you know how I feel about cramming. I don't allow it in any other course that I teach other than the 608 course. And that's because we're expected to. We have to. And then we have to do that test in an allotted amount of time, which also really sucks that it's a timed test. I wish I could change that because I absolutely would. But you have the tools. So you guys have all done skill cap. You guys have gone through this information so slowly and broken up into such small bits that you are retaining it. You have that information. And my goal is, and I hope that by our 14th group that is going to be testing out, I have found a way to make all of this redundant. Yes, Chris, it should be white noise. It should be white noise for my students too, because my students have gone through the correct form of teaching to their correct learning styles for the past months. And so if you've already done that, and I know you have because I'm the one teaching you, you don't need this. This is just a refresher. This is something so that the night before the test, you can go back and say, all right, these are my 25 questions. I've done that work for you. I've gone on and made sure that all 25 questions are addressed in this board, in this class. So if you're worried that you might not pass all 25 questions of the core, just take this class. Make sure that you are addressing everything in this, especially the dates. The dates are the number one thing. The EPA wants to know that you know what they've done. They're very, very proud, the EPA, of all of their incorrect choices, shall we say. But it's the way it is. We don't have a choice. If you want to pass this test, you have to get this core right. You have to write 500 microns and 1,000 microns, not 200 and 500, even though it's incorrect. That I was going to go into I was going to go a lot deeper into the A2Ls today. And I'm not going to do that because I don't want to confuse my guys that are going to take this test. We are going to do another basics A2L course. Those of you who haven't taken it on this YouTube channel before, go do that because this is going to go a little bit further than that into like more of a technician standpoint, not so much as like a core standpoint. Those of you who don't have a core basic understanding of A2L refrigerants and what's going on in our industry, go and watch that course because I fought really, really hard to get the information that was on there at a time where that information was not widely available. And like I said in the beginning, they love to tell us we have to do something a certain way. We have to use a certain thing. And then they love to just leave us hanging when we say, okay, teach us how to do that. They didn't teach us how to do that. They changed our lives completely faster than any of the other phase outs. So R22 is still widely in use today, and that's an HCFC. So if R22 is so widely in use, why is it that we're having trouble getting 410A, which is what it was phased out for? So this is all happening so much faster than any other phase out ever. And you guys were not prepared. You were not given any tools to be able to understand or fight that. So instead, we're going to do a separate course on what you need beyond the basics for A2Ls. And we'll get into that next week. For right now, today, you're taking your core course in a few days. You're taking your type 2 or universal course in a few days. I don't want you to stay up all night cramming. Maddie said it best right here. For those taking their EPA test, rest up the night before and don't cram that night. In fact, if you do cram that night, you will completely ruin your chances. Do not, I tell everybody not even to study the night before the test. Get your studying done in the days coming. And if you don't feel ready, we have this beautiful ability to be able to move your test date. So if anybody doesn't feel comfortable taking this test yet, you can wait weeks, you can wait months, you can wait till the next day. Maybe you weren't feeling it today, but you are tomorrow. We have a beautiful world of technology that allows that now. So please do not take it unless you're ready to take it, and do not cram for it the night before. Matt's 100% right. The night before, you need a good night's sleep. You need a good meal. You need to wake up and have breakfast. You need to drink your water. You need clarification in your mind. Don't let the stressors of life invade your brain the day of your test. It's going to be so much more simple than you believe it's going to be. And I promise you that. You guys have the tools. I have made damn sure, and y'all have shown up to make damn sure. We have had countless Zoom meetings on this topic over the past 3 months with, I think we have like 28 students that are testing out in this group. So all of you have shown up, all of you have showed out, all of you have done your own research on your own time. You've taken our courses and done skill cap. There is a very low chance of you failing this. If you fail it, it's because you did too much. You worried way too much the night before. You didn't get enough sleep, or you didn't slow down and read the questions. Read every word of every question twice. And this is requirement. I always tell my students that I can't tell you how to take a test, but it is a requirement in my mind that you read every question twice before you answer it. And so some of my students might take a little bit longer to finish that test, but I've never had a failure yet. So don't be the first. Don't kill yourself over this test. We also have more than one try. It's not like you have to pass it the first time either. So don't be the one that stayed up worrying all night, didn't eat enough, wasn't drinking water, ended up with a severe headache when they, came to take their test the next week. Don't do that to yourselves. It's not worth it. It's going to be 100% fine. And you know so much more than you know. So this is the last time I will see you before you test out, regardless of when you watch this video. Thank you so much, everybody who came here to give this video any clout whatsoever, because it's going to be so many people watching the recording, and they're going to see your comments and your questions on this video, which is going to be even more helpful. You are all technicians, and that's who the technicians need to learn from, not just people who have never been on a system standing in front of a class pointing a stick. They need to learn from other technicians. You guys' advice is so important to this next group, and I cannot wait for this next group to pass that test and get into this field. And that's 28 placements that we as HVA-Chicks Coalition get to make. And I cannot wait for you guys to pass that test. All right. Thank you all for coming. We are over our hour. I'm going to go. If anybody has any more questions for me, needs any more help to pass this test, please reach out. There is no excuse in 2025 to fail this if you're an HVA-Chicks student. Thank you, guys.